Welcome, everyone, and welcome back to the Gold Hoops and God podcast. I am the host, Dr. Guerra, and I'm very excited today to have my dear friend, Belén Morales, here with us today. Belén and I originally met some time ago. This was at the GTU in Berkeley. We had class together back in the day. And I clicked with Belén very quickly. We were navigating a very unique classroom and unique reading materials. Theology is what it is. And so we've been friends ever since. And I'm really glad that they are here today. So, Belén, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Super happy to be here. As Lauren said, my name is Belén Morales. I use she, they pronouns. I am a Latina queer femme that lives in Oakland, California, the greatest city in the world. I grew up in the Bay. I love the Bay. And I do nonprofit work and am and I volunteer with a few orgs around queer Christians that serve queer Christians or queer people of faith in a variety of ways. So I'll probably talk about that a little later.
Amazing. Yes. And so for the podcast, we try to talk about and unpack identity, because Latinx people have so many labels, right? Hispanic, Latinx, and all of these labels, each one of them feels a little bit problematic in its own way, right? And I think a lot of times we, as Latinx folks, get all put into the same pot, right? Like a melting pot idea, when each one of us has a very unique experience. Like growing up in Cuba is very different than growing up in Argentina, or being second generation, third generation. All of those things, all of those factors are really unique and important. So I'll invite Belén to tell us a little bit about her background and how she grew up and just your understanding of Latina identity.
Yeah, this is such a great topic, and it's so nuanced, and people have a lot of big feelings in all ways about it. And so I grew up, like I mentioned, I grew up here in the Bay. My mom is from Oaxaca, Mexico, and she met my dad in San Francisco in the mid 80s, and he's from El Salvador. So I grew up with kind of those both cultures, though I really was a little bit more exposed to Mexican culture because my mom was doing, of course, most of the caretaking. And growing up in the Bay, there's just hella Mexicans, there's been more Central Americans. Certainly, there's big populations of Central Americans, but California is a very Mexican state. And so I was just kind of more exposed to, my mom made Mexican food. But even my connection to both Salvi and Mexican culture were stunted because of colonization and religion. I grew up Baptist, specifically independent fundamentalist Baptist. There's a whole HBO documentary about it called Let Us Pray. It's harrowing, but that's what I grew up in.
Wow.
And my mom also grew up Baptist in Oaxaca. So,
interesting. I didn't know. Oh.
yeah. Her dad was or the person who raised her was a Baptist preacher. And so, so much of Mexican culture and Latina culture in general is Catholicism. Holidays, just how religion is seeped into the culture. We were cut off from that, we weren't allowed to do Day of the Dead. We weren't allowed to do, we weren't even allowed to know about the saints. Like, God forbid anybody mention Mary. So I think that kind of particular brand of religion, a very colonized denomination, well, I don't even say colonized, just white supremacist, honestly, is the root of that particular denomination. Really cut us off from our land, our ancestral practices, which is a project of colonization. So I definitely grew up with some of that. Most of the culture came kind of through food, but a lot of other practices and certainly typical Mexican and Salvi religious practices were not available to me.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Thank you for sharing. So that's really interesting. So an upcoming interview that I'm going to do, this colleague and friend of mine talks about growing up also in a very fundamentalist Baptist setting in Texas. So yeah, I mean, I think there's something there, right? Like, I think there's something there as far as like how faith is presented, how religion is presented. And granted, Roman Catholicism has its problems, obviously, right? Like, it is also colonial. It is also has been imposed in a lot of ways. So yeah, this stuff is tricky. Like, navigating faith and religion is really tricky. But that is really fascinating, that things that most people assume, right? Most people assume like, oh, all Latinos do this, all Latinos do that. It's like, no, not always, not really. As far as like Mary, the saints, that's that's Catholic. That's Catholic religion or Catholic practices.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember in community college, I was taking a philosophy of religion course, and we had to pair up with somebody to talk about like our religious background. And this little white girl was like, "So what was it like growing up Catholic?" I'm like, "I'm not Catholic." Like,
excuse me.
I was extremely annoyed by her.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just not it's not a monoculture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so along those lines, and you touched upon this a moment ago. California is a predominantly, at least culturally, a very a Mexican American Chicano kind of place, right? My family is Guatemalan and Ecuadorian, for those who are tuning in for the first time or who don't know me personally. And I'll be honest, aside from my immediate family who was Guatemalan, I didn't really get to meet other Central Americans, other Guatemalans for a very long time. And I didn't realize that how much of the Latinx culture that I was familiar with was actually Mexican, specifically Mexican American culture. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And and again, speaking to how, alas, how ignorant people can be, I remember people asking me, "Oh, what part of Mexico is your family from?" It's like, we're not from Mexico at all, Again, because everyone assumes everyone who is brown skinned or who looks Latina is from Mexico, or assumes that we all speak Spanish, right? These assumptions, all the assumptions come out, even though we are a much more diverse and complex people, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And there is like this Mexican hegemony in California, and I mean, and maybe this is going way down a rabbit hole, but like so much of
That's a
that
whole other
migration,
thing. Yeah.
so much of that, forced migration of Central Americans into the U.S., into Canada, are also because of Mexico's like foreign policies and how they've, a lot of the Mexican government has been a puppet of American imperialist interests since, the Mexican Revolution.
I mean, if we want to go there for a minute, we can. So, like the feminicide, right? There's a lot of evidence that is very much tied to the maquiladoras, to issues as a result of NAFTA, and things like that. So there's a lot there, absolutely, as far as like the border, migration. It's all intertwined for sure.
100%.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Yeah. So, like, speaking of, faith and religion and things, like, so you mentioned that you grew up Baptist, and we went to seminary together, right? And so obviously, like, that was, and I'd be curious to hear from you, kind of your perspective. It was a challenge to my beliefs and my faith to read these documents, right? To read Augustine, to read Aquinas, to read Luther, to read all of these, fathers, right? Fathers of Christianity. And then, thank goodness for cool classes where we got to read like feminist scholars, Phyllis Tribble and, Rosemary Radford Ruther and, all the rest. So I'm curious, like, how that kind of shaped you, like that academic work, and if it was a challenge to kind of like how you were raised or what you had believed prior to that. I'd be curious to hear.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, such a great question. I could talk about this for a very long time.
Huh?
But you know, I grew up like knowing the Bible backwards and forwards, you know. I
Mm,
like did like Bible, we call them Bible drills, very militaristic, like ugh.
mm.
You know, and so I and my mom like had me read like the Reina Valera version of the Bible out loud every day for like half an hour, you know, to work on my Spanish and then the Bible, you know.
Mm.
My whole world was
Wow.
Christianity. My whole world was the church, and this particular type of Christianity. And so, um, for a lot of reasons, my family left my childhood church when I was a teenager, and
Mhm.
I was feeling really kind of lost a little bit. And I had always felt, even when I was a kid, that, and maybe this is like, I don't know if this is like the spirit or me just being a Gemini, but I was like, these people are wrong about the Bible. Like, they're
Mhm.
wrong about a lot of things, but like,
Mhm.
there's something
Mhm.
here that's true.
Mhm.
God is love,
Mhm.
and like, I need to like, I wanted to know the Bible better than them because they were always trying to send everybody to
Mm.
hell.
Oh yeah.
And so, you know, and so in high
Hell
school,
must be at capacity,
yeah,
like,
literally,
geez, like it's, what I'm saying? Everybody's going, everybody's out there. Oh my
everyone straight to hell.
God. Right? Like, oh
Um,
my God.
and so in high school, I was a super nerdy. Oh, I'm still nerdy, but I was really like nerdy teenager. And like, you know, I was reading Harry Potter, but I was also going to the library and reading like memoirs from about, you know, that nuns wrote. And I was reading like,
I
you
love
know,
it.
Christianity, like
Mistakes and stuff. You're like,
leftist
you should love me, love. What's
politics
that?
and
I love it.
mystics and like all of, you know, I was like
You're so cool.
17 reading like Karen Armstrong's History of God. And so I really was
You
looking at
would.
religion
You
from
would.
like a historical, I know, I was really looking at religion from like a historical perspective too, you
Mm,
know.
mm,
She wrote this, Karen Armstrong, one of my favorite religious scholars or historians, wrote this little book called the Bible, and it was about the history of the Bible because I grew up thinking like the Bible just fell from the sky and
of
God
course.
wrote it
Yeah.
himself,
Yeah.
and was like, here you
Yeah.
go, you're welcome.
Printed in English or Spanish or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
yep,
Yeah.
yeah, in Spanish. And so when I read that little book, and it's like that big, and I read it, I think I was a senior in high school. Maybe I
Mm.
was in 18. I don't know. It was really transformative. Like, oh, there's like history behind this, you know? And so that kind of started like opening my mind more and more of like,
Mm-hmm.
there's a historical context to all of this. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, the
Yeah.
Bible wasn't written in freaking English or Spanish. Oh, sorry, I swear. In like English or Spanish. And so, so I went to community college. You know, I did philosophy,
Mm.
like religion classes, and I was like really fascinated. And
Mm-hmm.
so, after that, I did my 2 years at community college. And then I transferred to a 4-year Bible college. So it was a Pentecostal Bible
Mm.
college,
Oh my goodness.
extremely conservative. But
Really?
it
Oh
was
my
mostly brown
God.
folks, actually. There was very little white
Interesting.
people, folks of color. And
Wow. That's so interesting. That's so
and
good.
I was like the liberal
Oh,
at the
yeah,
time, you
the
know, I
wild
was
one, the wild one.
liberal,
Yes.
queer, like blah, blah, blah. And I was coming into my queerness still. I was
Mm.
like, by that time, I was like, okay, I am a little queer, but I didn't really like, I hadn't really like unfolded
You
that
were
yet. But I
freeing
totally,
yourself slowly but
yeah, but I
surely.
read a
Yeah.
ton about homosexuality in the Bible, and like I
Mm.
was reading so much of that. Like I had to intellectualize it all for myself to
Mm-hmm.
be like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this
Mm-hmm.
is me. So that
Mm-hmm.
was like part of that journey as well, like coming
Wow.
alongside of this. And so at Bible college, like I would just kind of prove to myself more and more, like, oh yeah, like there's a whole different world. Like I was taught the Bible in the like in the literal way, which is the most basic, unimaginative, ahistorical way of reading that text.
Yeah.
Thankfully, even though it was a conservative school, I had two professors, the two Bible professors were Cal graduates, and
Oh,
they were
nice.
really they're great, you know, and they were
Cool.
still obviously had a conservative bias and bent, but they did teach
Mm-hmm.
me like the
Oh,
other stuff, you
nice.
know, that there's other
Fantastic.
interpretations, that there's different kinds of biblical critiques, you know,
So good.
and so then I was like, well, let me go. When I decided to go to grad school, I was like, well, let me go the other way, going to Berkeley, you know, super liberal.
Liberal Berkeley. Yep, yep,
Right.
yep, yep.
And so it was interesting because I got
The
kind of like
hotbed of revolution.
conservative. Yeah, I got kind of that conservative
I
background
love it.
with people of color, and then I
Mhm.
went to a liberal space that was mostly white. I mean,
That's really interesting,
we were the
right?
only two Latinas in the program, you
Yes.
know? And like
Yes.
we
They
were in
were
different
not.
programs. You were doing your PhD, I was doing my master's, and
Yeah.
we like banded
We're like, oh my
together,
God,
and
another
we're the only
Latina.
ones.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
we're literally the only ones, right? It was
yeah,
super white.
yeah.
And so when I took that first class, my first class in grad school was queer theology. And to
I love
me,
it.
it was like, Thank God
I
I'm
know,
not
exactly.
crazy.
I'm not.
And I was
Yeah.
so, for me, it was salvific.
Yes.
For me, it felt intellectual
Ooh, that
pursuit,
chills.
like
I
saved
got
my
chills.
soul, my
Yeah.
life, my
Yeah.
sanity.
Yeah.
Because it was like, not only,
It's
because
liberative, literally. Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
so long, I had
Wow.
struggled with, is it okay to be queer and Christian? Is it okay to be gay? Is it okay to be lesbian? Is it okay to be
Right.
non-binary or trans?
Right.
And then when I got to GTU and I read like, when I took that queer theology class and read, I'm like, oh my God, queers have always been in the church. We make up the church. What a
Mm-hmm.
question. What is it? What a silly question.
Yeah.
We've been here all along, honey.
Yeah.
Ain't nobody
Exactly.
gonna kick us out. We are it.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so from then on, I've just been on like this, I think part of the thing that gives me like one of the things that gives me meaning, makes me feel alive and purpose is like preaching that good news,
Mm-hmm.
that like
Love it.
queers can have been always part of the church, will continue to be, that these cis heterosexuals have no authority over us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, and so I know that was a really long answer to your question, but
Love it.
in summation, it was a really it challenged some things,
Mm-hmm.
certainly. But overall it felt like it was a very salvific experience.
I love it. I love it. I love it. For so many reasons. Oh my gosh, where do I even begin? So I'll start with the Bible, right? Scripture. So it's interesting. My upbringing was almost the opposite. We didn't read scripture at home at all.
Right. Hmm.
Okay. And this came up because when it was time for me to go sign up for confirmation classes, so there's a Roman Catholic church within walking distance of my parents' house, very close by. That's where I did my first communion classes, right? Like it's kind of our local parish. And, they had like a sign up day, like let's say it was like a Saturday morning, come sign up. And they had like parent volunteers in the parking lot taking, with a clipboard, right? What's your name, your address, da 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 da. And so, my mom waited in the car. I was just supposed to like run up there, sign up, and then we're going to go on our merry way to like either Target, grocery shop, whatever we were doing that Saturday morning, right? Well, the lady was like, oh, okay, parent volunteer. She's like, okay, put your name, da 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 da. And she gets to her question, do you have a Bible? You'll need a Bible for class, for, confirmation class. I was like, oh, I don't think we have a Bible at home. We really don't read the Bible at home. Man, she was like, what? I was like, yeah, I don't know if we do. Like, I can get one. I was kind of like, I can get one if we need it. And she's like, oh no, your family's going to hell. Just like that. Your family's going to hell. How dare they not teach you the word of God? Like, she basically called me like a little Lucifer. She's like, big on. Like, like what the? I was, of course, by this time in tears. I was a little kid.
Poor,
I was a little kid.
she's the demon making
She
the
was
little
the
baby
demon
cry.
too.
What's wrong with you?
And so like I ran back, right? I ran back to the car. I was like, Mom, I'm a little kid. I'm like, Mom, we're going to hell. She's like, what happened? She's like, what happened? I was like, we don't have a Bible. She's like, oh no. My mom, no, Lauren, no. She's like, don't worry about that. She's straight up, she's like, Lauren, ignore that lady. Don't worry about that. Forget it. She's like, forget it. You're not doing confirmation. She's like, you're not doing confirmation. Forget it. And so funny enough, fast forward, I didn't do my confirmation until I was a freshman in college. And it was RCIA. Loyola Marymount offered RCIA confirmation classes through campus ministry. And that's what I did. Later on, when it was
Wow.
fully something that I decided for myself, right? As an
Yeah.
adult, being like, yes,
Hmm.
despite it all, right? Despite, the difficulties and challenges and et cetera, I do want to be a confirmed Roman Catholic, right? And so I went through that process. But yeah, the Bible, I mean, those were fighting words. Like, I couldn't believe it. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my
But
God.
isn't that pretty typical? From my understanding, a lot of like Catholic households don't have a Bible. Like the Bible is not centered to religious life.
Catholicism is not, and in Catholicism, biblical, like that. How can I explain this? the presence of biblical Bible, etc. in daily life, I feel like it's not as common in comparison to Protestants.
Oh
Like
yeah.
in Protestant churches, Protestant families, Protestant communities, be it Lutheran, Baptist, Anglican, whatever. Why? Because for Protestants, it's sola scriptura. It's Bible. It is Bible, Bible, Bible all day, all night. Right? And so I think that's part of it. I think again, certainly there are exceptions, right? Certainly there are exceptions to the rules. Certainly there's Catholics out there. Don't come at me, any Catholic Bible scholars, but
right.
right. But typically, it's just
Yeah.
it's one of those
Protestants
things.
said Luther translated it, so we're reading it.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. The Bible is so central to our life. I was actually looking at some childhood photos the other day, and in the bookshelf behind us, it was so funny because it was just like lined with leather-bound Bibles.
Really?
What Bibles did we need?
Oh my God.
Like, we just had so many. There's Bibles everywhere.
I love it. I love
No
it.
excuse to not
You
pick it
know?
up.
And what's interesting too, like even when I've in my teaching, and more so like when I was teaching high school and religion classes, I was like, do y'all know there's different versions? They're like, what? I'm like, uh-huh. New Revised Standard Version, King James.
There's so many.
Name it. There's so many. And if you look at them side by side, I'd even do that as an activity. I put it on the big screen, like look at the, what is it called? The website that I love is the Bible Gateway.
Oh,
You
yeah.
can like drop down like the menu. Let's look at Genesis side by side. Let's look at Job side by side.
Yeah.
It's a little different, huh? Like the words, like changing one word here, one word there, gives you a whole different meaning. And I'm like, whoa. I was like, yeah. It's crazy.
And then you get into the Greek and Hebrew of it all.
Oh,
and it's
Greek
just
and
like,
Hebrew. Oh, no. Yeah. Yeah. That's a whole different thing.
Like translation is interpretation.
Certainly is. Yep. Yeah. Oh, man. That's so crazy. Yeah. But I love that. I love that, friend. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. So I do appreciate you mentioning how embracing your queerness was a process, and it was kind of like a reconciling, I'm guessing, like a reconciling of like, okay, the things I've been told about homosexuality, the things that I've heard, right, from different sources may not be accurate, so I would love if you would be able to kind of share with us a little more on that in terms of like embracing your queerness and how how today as an adult, like how you navigate those two things of like embracing your queerness and embracing your faith. I think that would be really wonderful to hear.
Yeah, so I grew up in the Bay Area to Latina family, and so homophobia, we just swam in it. It was like the air that we breathed, and transphobia, of course, too. Everything, that was negative, back in the day was like, that's gay, like just everything. And it was like, even not only at church, hearing that the homosexuals are and I went to church in San Francisco, California. So imagine how mad they were about the gay people. It just goes to show that proximity doesn't mean shit. Oh, sorry, I keep swearing. That proximity doesn't mean anything. Like there's a bunch of
You're
queer
probably
people.
within a mile of the Castro, but no.
Yeah, it didn't matter. Like I was still in my little culty church, like
Wow.
and even like on TV, right? Like
Yes.
I watch old episodes of Friends that I used to watch all the time in the 90s. Like the gay panic was super real, or watching like show Derbez, on Univision, and like just like gay was always a punchline. It was always a punchline.
Yes,
It was one of the main punchlines. And so it just felt. I also didn't grow up. I didn't know any queer people. The only gay people I knew on TV was like Ellen, and I was like, that's not me. I don't know her. That's not my life. And so it felt like a very white thing. And so it wasn't until I was an adult, that I started meeting. I had like my first kind of legit group of gay friends when I was in my really early 20s, and most of them were white. But I was like, okay, I volunteered at the LGBTQ center like as an ally. And I just was like, oh my gosh, I feel so at home here. I feel so comfortable
There's
here.
something about it. Yeah.
There's something
Yeah. Yeah.
about
Yeah.
this, you know? And then
Mm-hmm.
like being
Mm-hmm.
around, like, it's like exposure. It's like you can't, was it Toni Morrison? Oh, I hope I'm not messing that up. It's like you can't be what you don't see. And it was like, I just didn't see it. And then I was like,
Right.
oh, there are like like Mexican lesbians and
Exist.
like
Yeah.
lesbians of color and queer people
Yeah.
of color. And I was like, oh my God, like these are my people.
Mm.
I'm gay, you know? And it took a really, really long
Makes
time to
sense.
get there, you
Yeah.
know? I came out as bisexual in my early 20s. And then when I turned 30, I came out as lesbian, you know?
Mm.
And that was a really big jump. And
Mm.
thankfully, you know, I'd never felt, and like, you know, talking about my faith journey, by the time I was accepting these things about myself,
Yeah.
I had like laid a solid theological and philosophical foundation for myself of like this is good and right and okay, and God
Yeah.
loves me, and
And
God
love.
made me like
Mm-hmm.
this, and God
Yes.
created queer people,
Yes.
and God is queer. Like God has no gender, God has all genders or no genders.
Right.
Like
Right.
God is transgender in that way, you know.
I love the Holy Spirit for that reason. Exactly.
Yes,
Like just
yes,
no
yeah,
labels here. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. You know, and you look at the Hebrew, and it's just like the pronouns are all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, so by the time I was coming out to the world, I had a pretty soft theological space to land. I
That's
also,
good.
when I was in my mid
Great.
20s, is that right? Maybe late 20s,
Mm-hmm.
I found this church called Ministerio Latino here in town
Mm-hmm.
through the CLGS at the GTU. So many
Oh,
acronyms.
good. Yeah.
The Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies is located at the Pacific School of Religion in
Mm-hmm.
Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, I was a part of the Latina Roundtable of queers doing theological work. And I found the coordinator of that program, Jennifer, introduced, she was like, hey, do you know this church called Ministerio Latino? It's like, it's a gay church that's like Spanish speaking. I said, what? And so I
Excuse
started
me?
going
What?
there like in 2015.
That's so
I guess ya
good.
casi 10 años, 10 years.
Wow.
And
That's so cool.
and I was also very salvific. It was like all queers. We're all speaking Spanish.
Yeah.
You know, the pastor Reino Ramos, who's still my pastor, Salvi lesbian.
That's so cool. Wow.
And
Amazing.
it really heals. It continues to heal a lot of like my religious trauma and wounds.
Mm-hmm.
To hear the Bible in my mother's language be taught in a way that's loving and affirming and
Yes. And
celebratory
not hateful. Yeah.
and it's not, you know, sending me to hell. Like it's been really, really healing. And so
Yeah.
I had a really soft place to land. I'm really grateful for
glad.
that. And I know a lot of people don't have that.
Right.
But I feel like in the Bay, like you find queer people of faith all the time, you know?
Thankfully, right? I mean, like,
And I know that's a privilege. Yeah.
you know, and this has come up for sure. I do think of people, like, for example, that they live in really small towns, really rural places. There's not a lot of diversity, et cetera. And just, I can only imagine, like, how alone, how alone someone can feel. And so, yes, thankfully, the Bay Area is very diverse and actually has, like, churches like this. That's so cool. That's really awesome.
Yeah, and now it's like I need to remember, right? Because it's easy to take for granted. Because now it's like, oh, you're still struggling with the whole homosexuality and Christianity? Like, that's so 2001. Like,
That's
you
yeah,
know,
it's still like 10 years ago. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
you're still struggling with this? Like, you know,
And
the
there
earth is
are,
on
you know,
fire.
and
You know,
there
the
are,
earth is on fire, right? Like, you know that there's a genocide happening. Like, there's real problems.
there's other
And
things
you're
to
like,
worry about. Exactly.
and you're like trying to shut like the twink that's trying to come to church. Like, what the hell's wrong with you? Like, yeah.
Let people live, man. Yeah, it's true. It's
Literally,
so,
yeah.
It's so true. You know, and again, like I have to say, like, I am grateful that my family has always just kind of operated in a very like open and accepting way, you know. Yeah, you know, it's good. In other words, like they modeled it without like necessarily realizing it, if that makes sense, you know,
Yeah, totally.
with things like race, with things like gender and sexuality, is like, that's our friend, you know, whoever it is, like, oh yeah, that's our neighbor, that's our friend, like that's my coworker, whatever. It's cool.
Yeah,
Not a big,
like
you know,
this
not a big
implicit
thing.
understanding.
There you go. Implicit
Yeah.
understanding. Exactly. Wow, that's super cool. Your church sounds awesome. You know, it's funny. So I still go to mass fairly regularly, fairly often. But I'll be honest, I I often struggle sitting in the pews because the homilies are not giving what they need to give, and as you know, like with the theological background, with the education background, it's like I want to stand up and be like, that's not accurate, that's not true, that's not real, that's not right.
That's
you know
gross theological misrepresentation.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So
Yeah.
it's tough, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's tough. And again, obviously, right, in the Roman Catholic Church, who's doing the preaching? It's men. Like, I don't get to see in the Roman Catholic Church, I don't get to see women pastors, I don't get to
Right.
see women
Right.
priests in the Roman Catholic Church. So yeah, it's a
Yeah.
it's a lot. There's a lot there for sure.
Yeah. And the ones who've tried have been called witches and demons. And we
True.
know what
Yes,
happens then.
exactly.
Hmm.
Oh
Yeah.
my God. And you're so right. When you were sharing earlier about the fact that there have always been queer people in the church, immediately I thought of Sor Juana.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she pretty much had a lesbian relationship with the
Yeah.
vicereine,
Yeah.
for who is
And how many
their
nuns do,
and
like,
many nuns. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
If I was like, if
If
I
I
was
was
born
a
in a
15th
different
century Jew,
century, I would
yeah.
absolutely be a nun and have a torrid lesbian affair. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean,
And like, what's her name? Julian of Norwich, like
oh yeah.
Hildegard. Like, come on.
Yeah, like, come
Come
on.
on.
Who are we kidding? Yeah, exactly. Let's be real. Exactly. Yeah, I agree. It's so true. It's so
Yeah.
real. Oh my
Hmm.
gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, religion is fascinating.
Yeah.
Religion
Yeah.
is fascinating. Faith is fascinating. I think it's incredible. You know what I mean? In the sense that it is both at the same time. It can be so liberative and so beautiful and create so much peace, right, in people's lives, or the exact opposite. It can be a source of so much pain and
Yeah.
frustration and hurt and just cruelty, right?
Yeah.
It's wild. You know what I'm saying? It's just
Yeah.
like, which God do you see? Do you know what I mean?
That's
It's kind of
right.
like, which God
And
do you
yeah.
believe in? Yeah.
And I totally understand the folks, especially the queer people who grew up in the church and
Yeah.
were like in tremendously traumatized.
Sure.
I totally understand them being
Sure.
like,
Peace out. I'm out. Yeah.
screw
Yeah.
this, I'm
I get it.
out. Never talk to me about
I
this
would
again.
be.
I don't
Yeah.
want to hear about church, Bible, anything. And I totally understand.
I
I
would be
totally
too.
get
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I don't think it should be forced on anyone. Because for me, at the end of the day, the Jesus narrative, the resurrection narrative, I find solace in that. I
Mm-hmm.
find hope in that. I find joy in it. This idea that there's life after death, metaphorically,
Yeah.
has gotten me through really hard times, really,
Yep.
really hard times. And it's a story, and I think at the end of the day,
Mm.
all we do is like create narratives for ourselves
Storytelling.
out of the world to make sense
Critical.
of
Mm-hmm.
things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's a story that works for me. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
but it's at the end of the day, like a narrative that not everybody chooses to find meaning, to derive meaning or hope
Sure.
from. And I think that's totally fine.
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
this point in my life, it's continued to serve me in different ways. I've
Mm-hmm.
remolded it, I've deconstructed it, I've
Mm-hmm.
remolded it
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
smash it again and built it up again. But
Exactly.
it's, the resurrection is something that I keep coming back to. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. And it's interesting, in another episode when I was interviewing Brenna Vaca, she, at one point, for a long time actually, she was a Methodist pastor. And so, do you know Brenda? She went to
Mm-mm.
GTU as well. Okay. But anyway, so talk about like having to deconstruct and reconstruct, and, just a sense of like finding peace and finding hope in that story of being there for others, right? So in other words, like that social justice, feeding the poor, clothing the
Mm-hmm.
naked,
Absolutely.
that is something really beautiful,
Yes,
and it can really give
exactly.
hope. And I don't know, I can, I'll speak for like for a second in terms of like my own personal experiences. I feel like I have gone through such insane situations, and truly and solely, I believe it was by the grace of God and through God's protection that I survived. Like quite literally. I just posted a video for World Mental Health Day, and especially during my bipolar episodes in summer of 2020, I know, and I mean, I know that God, the angels, universe, however you want to call it, something protected me, because there's no way in hell that I should have survived being out and about for several days in the streets of downtown San Francisco with no phone, no wallet, no nothing.
Yeah.
Right? Like in other words, like all the things that could have happened, right? And there's other instances where I'm like, wow, I'm protected. I'm grateful, and I have to have faith, because there's no way. Like there's no other way. Right? And even with my family, things that have happened, to my parents, to whatever, right? My brother, etc. It's like, no. Like for me, I'm like, God is real. Say what you want to say, but for me, I can't deny it. You know what I mean? Like yeah. So it's a lot. It's intense, but
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's so important to like that's beautiful, like that you have that belief. And I think at the end of the day, if that's like what works for you and what gives you
gets you
peace,
through. Yeah,
helps connect the dots for
exactly,
you, I think that's really beautiful. I
exactly.
did want to touch on a thing that you said about justice, because that's something I think that I've left out in the conversation thus far. Because it bugs me when people say, I was watching, oh, this is embarrassing. I was watching 90 Day Fiance, and this,
I watch it too, girl. Reality TV.
okay, great.
It's okay. It's okay.
And one of the women was like chastising her man
Mm,
because he didn't believe in God. And she was like, "How do you know right from wrong?" And I just thought that was unhinged,
interesting.
because if you need God
Not
to
fair.
know
Yeah.
that lying and murder is bad, it's
Mm,
not great. And I really
yeah.
don't
Yeah.
appreciate when religious people do that. Like that God is the only moral compass. Like I think
Yeah.
innately as humans, and one can call it God, the Holy Spirit, we're created in God's image,
Sure.
blah blah.
Hmm.
Or you can just say it's like basic human decency
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
not want to kill your neighbor. Um, and so yeah, so that's just something that I think like
It's
religious
not good.
people
Yeah.
really
It's
get
not good.
not yeah wrong. And it's usually those same people that don't give a crap about those with food insecurity,
No.
unhoused people,
No. Yeah.
genocide, wars. It's usually like they're like go America, which I think is so antithetical to Christian faith.
Mm,
Like pledging
mm.
allegiance to any empire is
Ooh. Yep.
antichrist. If I can
Right.
get to preaching a little bit here. Um,
Yes.
so,
Yes. Yeah. 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 Exactly.
but that's also what keeps, that's also one of my favorite things about the Bible is that it does speak so
Hmm.
much about justice.
Hmm.
I mean, and so much about human connection, that there is
Hmm.
no Jew or Greek, there's no male or female. We all one in Christ Jesus.
Hmm.
Galatians
Hmm.
3:28. And so the
Nice.
Bible, those Bible jewels really
You
come
got
through.
yeah, exactly, girl. You got the verses.
And that to me, like, is talking about, human connection, transcending gender, transcending
Hmm.
religion,
Yeah.
and caring about that there is a moral imperative,
Yeah.
that's like
Totally.
that we are to, we are our siblings' keeper.
A
And
thousand percent.
though I don't think we need the Bible to point us to that, I do think it's really beautiful and lovely and grounding
Yeah.
that it is in the
There
scripture.
are, like there are
Yeah,
aspects that are so beautiful. Like, I'm not gonna lie, there's certain songs that are sung in church that are very moving, that I'll like tear up. 'Cause I'm like, oh my God,
totally. Yeah.
you know. Um,
And
and it's
scientifically,
true.
there's something about singing together that like,
Yes, yes,
yeah.
for sure, for sure. Um, oh yeah, and so it's true, right? Like the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth was under the Roman Empire.
That's right.
Like that was a product of empire. It's very
State
clear.
violence. Yeah.
State violence. Hello, right? So I don't know. Yeah, it's super interesting, right? It's like people. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. It's like not seeing how. very countercultural and revolutionary Jesus was.
He's
The
political.
story
He's very
is,
political.
he's
Yeah.
very political. Thank you. Yeah.
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 Stanley
So,
Hauerwas, which I don't agree with all of his theology, but he has a really great book called, what is it called? I see the cover of the book. It's a cross with the American flag over it, but he has a shoot, it's gonna drive me nuts. But he has a really great analysis on the revolutionary political aspect of Jesus. That's really anti-American. I'll say it. You know, anti-empire.
anti-empire.
In
Yeah.
general.
Yeah. Exactly. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow, friend. Whew, this is a lot. This is really good. This is amazing. Yeah, I love it. I love it. I think there's like so many good things that we were able to touch upon and talk about. So as we,
These are all my favorite topics.
I love it.
Queerness,
Yes, it's the best. Oh my gosh.
biblical history. Let's go.
Yeah. Yeah, Bill and I always have a fun time chatting together. Oh yes. So like as we're wrapping up, so this is a question that I usually close with for the interviews, because I think for so many of us, the journey to adulthood is hard, it's challenging. And I think that there has been this call in terms of like healing, inner child healing. And I hope that this, I hope that the podcast can be helpful, inspiring, supportive, etc., for young people, especially. And so I will ask you, what is a piece of advice or something that you wish you had known growing up that you would tell young people today, or kind of reflecting on like little Belén, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great question. I think the first thing I would tell them is to relax. Just relax. I was such an anxious kid.
Yeah.
And I'm so anxious. Anxiety disorder babies rise up. But I was really anxious. I was anxious about hell. I was anxious about the rapture. Oh my God.
A rapture.
I'd stay up worried about the rapture. I'd
No.
check my mom's room to see if she was still there.
No. Oh.
Like my first anxiety was around God and the devil and hell.
Oh no.
Those were my anxieties, and other kids worried about like the boogeyman or whatever. I was like, I know that's not real, but hell is, and so is the devil, because that's what I was taught. And so I was a really anxious kid. So I would tell her to relax.
Yeah.
That I would point her to the Bible, because that's the only thing I would have listened to at the time. Romans 8:38 talks about there's nothing, not hell or heaven or demons or principalities that can keep you from the love of God. And I still believe that. So, I would tell her to relax. I don't have to have all the answers. To love myself and trust myself, because those are things that I also was taught to not do, because of original sin. We're all going to hell and horrible people. I would tell her that that's not true. Like, actually, I am worthy of love, and that to love myself, to trust myself, trust my instincts, trust my gut, trust my ancestral leanings and intuition. And I'd be like, baby, you're gay, and it's okay. It's okay. I know that's a lot
like,
for you
honey.
to hear right now. I know that feels
Embrace it.
insane, but you're gay, and like the sooner you can make
Yeah.
peace with yourself and live your life, like it's gonna be good, and God's gonna be cheering you on with their little rainbow flag, and
Exactly.
it's gonna be fine. It's all going to be so good.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
that's what I would tell myself.
Yay! I love that. I love that. I love that. I love that. And it's so interesting. This has been a common theme from the different folks that I have talked with, is the sense of like, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. All the things that you were so worried about and stressed out about, like, you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Try to enjoy the moment instead of like torturing yourself, you know what I mean? Like over what have you. And trusting oneself. I think this has been a consistent theme. And I think it's really incredible. I think it's so true, but especially when we're younger, it's very easy to get super influenced and swayed by external forces, right? Wanting to fit in, wanting to be liked, wanting our parents to be happy, right? Like all these other external forces, when we don't listen to ourselves. And granted, it takes time to grow and to know yourself, like to really know yourself. It takes time, but I think that like you said, like the sooner that that can happen, it's a game changer. Like it's really incredible. You know, it's a wonderful thing.
I think what you're saying is like also points to, or what we're saying is like points to like the insidious nature of like religious sex.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I think I love cult documentaries. I think because I grew up in kind of a low key cult. Um, and one of the first things cults do is they tear down your sense of self. They make
Mm-hmm.
you not trust yourself.
Mm-hmm.
They put in you that you are unreliable narrator to tell your own story and to live your own life. So you need others around you to tell it for you, to tell your
Mm-hmm.
story for you, and tell who
Mm-hmm.
you are. Um, and I think that's one of the most harmful things I've had to unlearn from how I grew up,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because they take away your trust in yourself
Mm-hmm.
first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the very harmful theology around original sin
Oh yeah.
like leads you to the same conclusion,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
that it wasn't for the grace of God, you would be like this terrible monster that's
Mm-hmm.
unworthy of
Mm-hmm.
love. And that's, I don't read that in the text. I think that's what men in religion have used to control and to
Mm-hmm.
manipulate
Yeah.
over millennia, and they will continue to do so.
Right. Right. Oh my goodness. Wow. Powerful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that.
Thank
This
you.
was
This was so much
amazing.
fun.
Yay!
I
So
love
good.
talking
So
about all
good.
this
So good.
with
So
you.
good. Oh my goodness. I'll be sure to link Belén's company. Belén owns a consulting firm. And so we'll make sure to link that too. So
Yeah, and can I just plug a
please,
couple
please.
things really
Yes,
quick?
yes, go for it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so my consulting firm is called Root and Bloom Consulting, rootbloomoak.com, and I work with nonprofits led by folks of color. I work with leaders of color in the nonprofit sector to maximize their impact around, I do resource development, fundraising. I really love working with boards of directors, managing, developing, recruiting. So that's what I do in my day job. And then I'm also part of two really amazing boards. One is called Soul Force. Some of you may know them. They're an international group that fights Christian supremacy and creates a lot of space for queer folks of color, queer Christians. We're doing our Culto Queer in Mexico City later this month, which I'm really excited
Okay.
about, where we'll be offering baptism to trans folks so they could be baptized in their chosen names, and offering communion to queer folks when often we are not afforded that opportunity to take communion as a community. So that's Soulforce. You can visit them at soulforce.org. We're also Instagram. And then the other group is called Infleshed. We create and provide spiritual resources for queer folks, Christian clergy, any leader of faith, really. So we have a Liturgy That Matters library where you can find scripts and poetry for weddings, funerals, protest actions, a host of things. So you can find us at infleshed.org or the Infleshed Instagram.
Amazing. So I'll make sure to tag those different organizations. Thank you again, Belén. So,
Thank
folks, I
you.
hope you enjoyed this really, really great episode of the podcast. Again, Gold Hoops and God podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lauren Guerra. You can find this on YouTube for a video of this amazing interview. You can stream the podcast wherever you hear your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you name it, you'll find us there. Okay. I have an Instagram, goldhoops_God, and Facebook page. We got it all. So engage with me, send me a message. Thank you for being here. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Belén.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Take care.